I would like to introduce the speakers. Professor Richard Bell from Murdoch University specializes in the soil fertility and land management with research experience in Australia and South Asia, specifically Bangladesh. He has worked in Bangladesh for almost 2 decades and is the project leader of the project on scaling and commercialization of conservation agriculture and nutrient management systems. Dr. Enamal Haq, adjunct professor, Murdoch University, who has 27 years of practical experience in the field of soil nutrient management, conservation agriculture, farm mechanization, technology dissemination, and commercialization of agriculture equipment. He is very passionate about small scale mechanization, and I've had many discussions with him on that. He has contributed significantly to the development of new technologies on CA-based crop management and machinery development. I will now hand over to the speakers. Richard, uh, will you go first?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to this presentation. And I'm pleased that my co-authors Enamal Haq and Mizanul Haq, who is the CEO of our commercial partner, Haq Corporation, are with us today, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer some of the questions. And you can see their photograph in the image there. What we're sharing here is the learning over 14 years, basically, in a series of projects that ACR has invested in Bangladesh. This one is about commercialization of smallholders, conservation agriculture-based planters. The main messages I'm going to cover today is firstly, what are the benefits of conservation agriculture for smallholders? Because unless we have a suitable and effective and profitable technology, then the issue of commercialization of machinery is moot. So I'll spend a bit of time going through what we found from our research. Then I want to focus on the scaling out these benefits, which is the focus of our current work, building demand and supply for planters, innovation and commercialization of the planters, and also policy dialogue. This work's being done in Bangladesh, but Bangladesh is sits on the eastern Gangetic Plain, so this vast area crossing Bangladesh into eastern India and also Nepal. They're essentially the same agro ecosystems, very similar land uses, and what we're talking about should have relevance to those parts of India and Nepal as well. This area collectively has 370 million people living in it. So it's not a trivial area, and any technology innovations and benefits that we can bring to farmers can benefit a lot of people in this region. But it's a region where there are significant threats to crop production. One that has emerged in the last decade is the shortage of labour, farm labour, which is pushing up the price of farm labour. In fact, many farmers that we talk to say, we don't mind paying more for labour, we can afford it, we simply can't find it. In some parts of this region, there are declining water tables from over-extraction, but not in all places. And finally, the cost of production of crops in Bangladesh is relatively high, which makes the crop produced and placed in the market quite vulnerable to cheaper imports. Conservation agriculture is a global endeavour, but most of it, almost 90% of the conservation agriculture practiced globally occurs in Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and the US, those 5 countries. From the studies done in those countries, there are a number of key drivers that are common that have allowed or enabled farmers to adopt conservation agriculture. Firstly, erosion control. Secondly, the emergence of cheap herbicides, labour shortages and labour costs, the rising cost of fuel, the need for timely sowing, and in dryland environments to conserve water. All of these could be significant drivers because they're relevant to smallholder agriculture as well. Much of the technology, though, has been developed for four-wheel tractors and big machinery, and it can achieve really outstanding results in terms of no-till or zero-till seeding of crops, as you can see in the photograph. But our question and challenge in Bangladesh was, how can this technology be adapted for smallholders? Firstly, the farms are small, and more importantly, individual fields may only be 1,000 square metres or less, so that four-wheel tractors are simply unsuitable and unable to manoeuvre in those conditions. Another question is, how long will adoption take? This is data from the 5 states in Australia. Research on conservation agriculture or no-till agriculture actually started in the 1970s. So in Western Australia, it took 15 years or more before that research really started to have an impact and farmers really started to adopt it in a significant way. And after 25 years, we had over 90% adoption. But in South Australia, it took almost 10 years longer. So from 75 to 2012 before they reached similar levels of adoption. And other states of Australia still haven't reached that point of adoption. So it is a long journey. And I'd like to stress that in all of the countries where conservation agriculture is now well established, governments all had various incentives that encourage farmers to take it up. So in Australia and Brazil, it was very much about tax incentives or other incentives to reduce soil erosion that led to the take-up of conservation agriculture in a rapid way. So what Inamul Haq has come up with through his study of small-scale planters and large-scale planters in various parts of the world, through pioneering work that Simmet did in the 1990s, he came up with a small-scale planter which could be attached to the Chinese two-wheel tractor, which is called the versatile multi-crop planter. And I'm going to talk mostly about this type of planter, which we're trying to commercialize in Bangladesh. So it's selling for 900 to 1,000 US dollars. It's fully made in Bangladesh, although it uses many parts that have been imported. And it's been through many iterations of improvement over the years, which I'll go through later. We're using a form of minimum tillage called strip planting, where the rotating blades on the rotary tiller only disturb a zone about 3 to 5 centimetres wide and similar depth, just enough to place seed and fertiliser, and the rest of the soil remains undisturbed so that it does comply with the definitions of conservation agriculture and minimum soil disturbance. With these machines, we can plant a whole range of crops. So from the tiny seeds of sesame through to larger seeds like maize, which have to be spaced apart, to wheat, which can be sown on beds in continuous seeding, lentil, direct-seeded rice. So almost all of the diverse crops that are grown in Bangladesh, we've tested and can effectively establish them using this planter. Through the accumulated research that we've done over many years, plus studies done on farmers' fields where they have adopted strip planting with the VMP, we can summarise the main benefits that farmers get. The main one is profit. We hardly ever see a situation where farmers lose money, and some of the profits are really quite impressive. The profits come partly from increased yield, although not always. Mostly they come from lower costs, less labour, less fuel, and there can be other benefits such as water saving for some crops, but not necessarily all crops. When adopting CA on farms, if a small farm, zero 0.6 hectares, growing 3 crops a year, use this system with the VMP planting, they could be saving over $300 per hectare per year. And the small businesses, the service providers who are doing the seeding, from our studies, they could be generating income of extra income of $1,700 per year. The break-even service, they need to sow 8 hectares per year to break even. The average from the survey that Dr. Moni and Mia did in 2017 showed that service providers were averaging 19 hectares per year, and the payback period at the rate of earning was less than a year. So that seemed to be quite a profitable business and quite profitable for farmers. One of the key challenges we have in rice-based agriculture, wetland rice agriculture, is how to incorporate that into a conservation agriculture system with minimum tillage. You could do it with direct seeding, although there are still challenges with managing rice with weeds. We've done some work on non-puddled transplanting as another way of establishing rice with minimum soil disturbance. Using the strip tillage system, the VMP creates the strips. You can then flood the soil, leave it for 24 hours, the soil softens, and you can transplant directly into those strips. So that's the way in which we have developed non-puddle transplanting. We've done other research about the conservation agriculture system. Khairul Alam's PhD and Ariful Islam's PhD collectively showed something like a 2/3 increase in soil organic carbon and total nitrogen after 5 years. And Khairul's life cycle analysis showed that there was a 30% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions using the CA system in the rice crops. So having developed a technology which we think is profitable and robust and amenable to a whole range of crops and soils, our next challenge was outscaling. And so this was our roadmap for outscaling. No technology is ever perfect when you begin to promote it. So there are always things to be improved, and as you extend the technology, you learn of new constraints that require additional research to overcome them. So there are some cropping systems constraints that we need to keep working on. Direct seeding of rice, I think, is a really important goal to aim for, but there's still some challenges to turn that into a reliable technology. Maintaining effective weed control when you're not able to use tillage to control weeds, that remains a challenge, but technology is evolving for that purpose. There's a question of what's the minimum level of residue retention for these small scale planters, or maximum level of residue for these small scale planters, and questions around water balance. No machinery is ever going to be perfect either, so the task of improving machinery is an ongoing one. It's no different from the cars that we buy, that every year there are new models of cars with improvements and new features and innovations. And so it will be with planters and transplanters, which are going to be needed to outscale conservation agriculture in the rice-based systems. The other parts of the roadmap is about creating demand. There's no point in being able to manufacture and deliver planters if there's no demand. Conversely, there's no point in encouraging farmers to take up this technology and doing lots of demonstrations if you can't supply quality machines and provide adequate training for the operators so that they know how to use them effectively. Fortunately, in Bangladesh, there are a number of favourable aspects of the enabling environment for commercialisation of the planters. Firstly, mechanisation, small-scale mechanisation is already well in place and well established across Bangladesh. And there's a service provider network who provide all sorts of on-farm services. The Biri and the universities have been engaging often with collaboration from CIMIT and agencies such as this, have been engaging in R&D for small-scale mechanisation for many years. There's already a private sector of small to medium companies that are involved in manufacturing and selling small-scale machinery. There are farmer clubs and farmer federations such as the CASPA network that we have helped to set up. CASPA stands for Conservation Agriculture Service Providers Association. It's a network of over 10,000 farmers. There are banks that are willing to lend for machinery. In fact, the banks we've talked to are very keen to find good projects for providing loans into the agricultural sector. There are many NGOs who are very keen on promoting mechanisation and supporting food security in every way that they can. Our research, supported by ACR, together with the national institutes and the universities, has been focused in a number of research hubs, and over 5 to 10 years of working in those hubs, which is essentially within a union of our upazila, we've built really good trust relationships where the DAE and the farmers and the farmer organisations know us and have developed trust in the work that we do. And finally, there's interest in many countries for small-scale machinery such as the VMP, which means it could be exported. Critical player in the outscaling are the local service providers. There are about 700,000 two-wheel tractors in Bangladesh, and most of them are operated by local service providers who provide contract ploughing as well as other services. Our vision is to be able to add an extra service to these service providers so that they also become contract planters. So I want to now talk more about the commercialisation and the approach that we have taken to it. It's focused around matching supply and demand. Firstly, the demand creation. Conservation agriculture, sowing crops with minimum disturbance of the soil, one-pass planting, row seeding, retaining crop residues, all of those things are quite new to farmers, and so it needs on-farm demonstrations. The demonstrations need to be visible and they need to be carried on over a number of years so that farmers, as they walk past, drive past, can observe what's going on. They can see the planting, they can see the emergence, they can see the crop growth, and they can ask the farmer about the yield. And that helps to build their experience and build their confidence in the technology. One caution, though, I would add, when you go to a new area to demonstrate conservation agriculture, it's a complex and new technology. It's important to go with experienced operators and people who know what to do in order to manage weeds. Because if you take inexperienced operators, they tend not to sow the crop as well as they could, and they don't control weeds properly. And so the first experience, what farmers see, may actually discourage them rather than encourage them. We think it's important also that you don't have demonstrations that are just scattered all over the place, different places each year, but try to maintain a focus area where the demonstrations take place so that farmers see it more than once, they talk to each other, and they have a chance to ask questions. Finally, we think with demand creation, it's really important that farmers and the LSP have a voice to give feedback. We need to know what they think. Are they satisfied? What are the positives and negatives that they have observed? Because whatever's a negative, we need to, as a project and in the commercialization sphere, we need to work on trying to find solutions to those as quickly as possible. And that's why we have worked with the Casper Farmer LSP network. In terms of supply creation, the critical thing is to find a private sector partner who has a proactive market development plan and a customer-focused approach. We approached quite a number of potential manufacturers, and many of them were quite happy to supply machines on order, but they really didn't see it as their job or their responsibility to market the product or develop that market and to take feedback from the customers to work on overcoming faults and improve the service of the planter. So a private sector who has that approach is really critical, and we were very, very fortunate to link up with Mijan ul Haq and the Haq Corporation as our commercial partner in that regard. Supply needs access to credit. The cost of the planters is greater than any one farmer or potential service provider can afford without credit, with some exceptions. And there needs to be work on policy dialogue, including with banks. And finally, we have focused on trying to put together what we call smart incentives. Subsidies are not always smart. In fact, subsidies can end up having the opposite effect of what you would like them to have. So we're focused on smart incentives. So what I'm talking to you about is the current work on this ACR-funded project, the project on commercialisation of smallholders CO-based planters, led by Haq Corporation. They have taken up the challenge to commercialise the VMP. What I want to stress to you is that the current VMP has been through many versions of improvements. Version 5, actually this work started in 2006. Version 5 was the first real VMP that had versatile multi-crop planting capabilities. But even after that, in the last 8 years, there have been another 10 versions of the VMP. So every time we saw field performance, which we thought wasn't quite up to expectation, we looked at how to improve that field performance. For example, in version 7, we were concerned that too much soil was being thrown out of the strip and not enough soil cover was over the seed, and that obviously affects the germination and emergence. And then subsequent versions have looked at making the machine stronger, lighter, improving the seed meters, and making it more flexible for operators in the field. And Hot Corporation continues with that innovation and continues to identify improved features with the machine. With our smart incentives, we've used two approaches. There's one that we call the planting incentive model. And what we were focused on was, how do you provide incentives to the LSP and the farmers to, one, buy the machine and two, use it? So we've provided incentives based around completing planting. So not an upfront incentive, but an incentive based on actually using the machine and planting crops. So in our project, using the ACR funds, we assure a new LSP that up to 50 bigger of planting, they will get an incentive payment of 500 taka per bigger, which is the current rent out price for planting. So if the new LSP completes that amount of planting, they will get an incentive payment of 25,000 taka, which is 1/3 of the cost of buying it. We've also, the project and now Hot Corporation, helped them with arranging a bank loan. They all have to put down a prepayment deposit. They all have to take part in a training session, several training sessions, in fact. And their payment has to be made prior to delivery before the planting season. And Hot Corporation and our project actually go to the field and survey their planting to see whether they've done it well, to ask the farmer if they're satisfied, and to confirm that they planted the area that they said they planted before that incentive payment is made. And Hot Corporation also offers after-sales service, including upgrading some of the parts if they have been changed. The second model we've used is what's called the tripartite model, where a service provider can buy the tractor and VMP. So that's a much bigger expenditure. And under that model, they take a bank loan for 50 to 60%. They have to pay 26 to 36%. And our project has been paying 13.5% of the cost, which we pay directly to the bank to reduce the size of their loan. And we also provide these other services, which I talked about before. What have we learned from this? First is that the planting incentive model is the most popular. So out of 130 sales, 104 of those were for the planting incentive model. But this is a price-sensitive market. The total cost of the VMP is not a trivial cost. And so any variation in the cost certainly affects sales, and finding a way to reduce the cost to the farmers, we realise is now an important part of this commercialisation process. Government subsidies exist for selected machinery. Hot Corporation have applied to get the VMP added to the government subsidy list. But we have seen some evidence that the current subsidies do distort the market and make it more difficult for the VMP to be sold. Banks were very keen to lend money for VMP, but they were reluctant to monitor the loans, to actually send their field staff out to make sure that the loan recovery was close to 100%. And Hot Corporation have taken on some of that responsibility. Job security for the trained operators is critical. They're all looking for a year-round job rather than a month here or a month there. We've also been experimenting with collective action of seeding where you get blocks of farmers together to hire the VMP to come and plant all at the same time. And that achieves greater economies of scale. And finally, we've identified in recent sales that there are two business models operating here. About half of the purchasers primarily are farmers who want to be able to sow their own crop at the right time. And the other half are people who are looking to build a business and are primarily interested in hiring out their planter to service other farms. And that's reflected in these figures here for about 66 LSP that were surveyed last year, that the LSP who are sowing more than 50 bigger are the ones who are in it as a business. The ones who are sowing less than 50 bigger are primarily farmers who want to sow their own crop. That's particularly those that sow less than 5 bigger. And they might also sow some of their neighbours and relatives, but their overall sowing is not that large. And therefore, the income that they make is low compared to those that are primarily looking for a business opportunity. Manufacturers also need incentives to get into this market and develop the market and to spend money on product innovation, loan recovery, setting up dealer networks, maintaining quality control of planters, correcting faults. If they want to get into the export market, there need to be incentives as well. And there needs to be recognition of which planters are the best quality so that the manufacturers of those machineries actually get goodwill in the market and recognition of their product. I'm almost at the end. I have a couple of case studies. We started most of our work in the Rashai area, which is an area of intensive cropping, because we thought in those areas where there are lots of crops, the planting dates don't all overlap, and therefore it provides the opportunity for extended period of business for the LSP. And in Rashai, we've sold 28 units. The current year, only 18 of those have been used. And this illustrates the complexity of commercializing in a changing economic environment. So in this area, where farmers had been getting very excited about CA planting of crops, and adoption in some blocks was getting up to almost 20% of their planting, aquaculture and beetle leaf cultivation are really expanding in that area and taking up more and more land. And so farmers' interest in these other crops is waning. And so this year, the total planting was only 550 bigger for the recent Rabi season. The second case study is at Noakali, where the NGO Solidaridad in 2018 got in touch with us because they were trying to promote soybean in that area and had identified the VMP as a suitable planter for soybean. And so we've been working with them, and they have helped with the sale of 24 units there for soy. Virtually all of those are in use. Through sowing soybean, we've been able to make some modifications to the machine to make it more suitable. And we've also identified some challenges such as late monsoon rain, which interferes with the sowing season there. This year for soybean, over 1,000 bigger sown. So my main message here is that our research and the research of many others, Thrifty Project, Bari, Biri universities, collectively we've demonstrated major benefits of CA for smallholders. Yield is either maintained or increased. There are savings of fuel, labour, and more timely sowing of crops. For the environment, CA reduces greenhouse gases and improves soil organic carbon and nitrogen. And now we're working on scaling out of these benefits by creating demand. And the time, I think, has come for the government of Bangladesh, through its Agricultural Extension Agency, to look into this and start to expand the demand creation to a much larger area than we've been able to do in our pilot study, and to look very closely at incentives and credit that will be necessary for the scale out to take place, and look at ways in which the support of ongoing innovation and commercialisation can occur. Much of our research is published, so I encourage you to look into those papers or contact us. And finally, I'll stop here, but on the slide, recognising all of those who have made a significant contribution to this work and to where we've got to so far. So let me finish off there and open things up for questions.
Thank you, Richard, for the very well presented data. Now, I don't see any questions in the chat box. So how will people raise their hands and ask the questions? Okay, the first one is from Richard. To what extent are the benefits contingent on well-trained?
Yes, from Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Yeah, look, well-trained operators are critical. This is a new technology. Remember that the current service providers are doing rotary tilling, and rotary tilling is very forgiving of all sorts of different soil moistures and soil types. If the soil is dry, the rotary tiller will cut through the soil. If the soil is wet, it will cut through the soil. But with sowing of dryland crops into the soil, you need to judge the right moisture content, and you also need to judge the right depth of sowing in order to get good emergence. These small machines don't have very high clearance, so the height of the residue is important for good sowing as well. So that's why with all of our work with Hock Corporation, training is right at the forefront of what we do. And not only that, but we try to create a network, a support network amongst the service providers so that they talk to each other and that the experienced people talk to the less experienced people, and that way they share their learning and problem solve without being totally dependent on the project or Hock Corporation to solve every one of those problems.
Rafisa Begum, did you have a question?
No, actually, I haven't any question.
Okay, thank you. Tushar Pandey has a question. Can the VMP be used with four-wheel tractor? Any work done to compare the cost of using VMP with four-wheel tractor over a larger area using land pooling?
Thanks for that question. We have been asked the question many times, how long will the two-wheel tractor remain the main power source in Bangladesh? And nobody knows the answer to that, but I think our assessment is that it's probably around for another 20 or 30 years. Please mute the microphones. So, but already there's something like 55,000 four-wheel tractors in Bangladesh. Most of those, from my observation, are used not in the ag sector, but in the construction and transport sector. But nevertheless, there are four-wheel tractors and there is interest in four-wheel tractors. So in our ACR-funded project, we are doing some development work to see if we can make a VMP that would be suitable for a small four-wheel tractor. The issue with four-wheel tractors in Bangladesh is that one, field sizes are very small. So unless there's a program, formal or informal program, to try and aggregate land holdings to make it more suitable for four-wheel tractors, they're not going to be very cost effective compared to a two-wheel tractor. And secondly, there's very little access of four-wheel tractors into the various fields. There are no road network or tracks already set up to allow those bigger machines to move from field to field. And often the roads are built up 3, 4, 5 meters above the ground level. And so just to get tractors down into the fields requires quite a lot of infrastructure development. I mean, all of that can be done. And if the government changed its land policy to encourage more aggregation of land, I'm sure those sorts of changes will begin to happen. But I think we'll have a period where the two-wheel tractor is dominant, and a transition into more four-wheel tractors where appropriate planters for four-wheel tractors will be necessary. And who knows, in 40 years' time, we might come back and see larger fields, consolidated land holdings, and only four-wheel tractors operating in Bangladesh. But possibly I won't be here to see that.
Yeah. Richard, if you allow me, I would like to say something.
Yes.
Yeah, look, based on the requirement from many others four-wheel tractor using countries, we are thankful to ACIAR to do some R&D on four-wheel tractor based VMP, and that is now underway. So it may take few rounds to develop the four-wheel tractor based VMP, and once we finish that, and I am very hopeful that the VMP can be used for four-wheel tractor based countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anam. Robin has a question.
About
She's in,
yes.
she's
About
she's
weeds.
On weeds.
I'm just interested, Richard, because the study that we've done in the Eastern Gangetic Plain came up with quite different results to the experience in Africa, where weeds were seen as a major issue. What have you been finding?
Well, herbicides are now just about everywhere in Bangladesh. So it is a technology that farmers have already adopted. But there's generally, when a farmer first takes onto conservation agriculture, it takes them a year or a crop to recognize that they've been relying on cultivation to control emergent weeds at starting. And with conservation agriculture, you do need to be a little bit better prepared with pre-emergent herbicides or knockdown herbicides. So, but all of the work that Inam and his team have done on farms, they can control weeds quite successfully, but it's just that initial learning point where unless experienced operators are telling farmers, no, you need to do this, otherwise weeds will be a problem. But once they've recognized that, weed control is very much under control. But we do want to draw attention to herbicide resistance. Around the world, herbicide resistance continues to spread, and the basic message is that if you find a good herbicide that's working well and you keep using it, you'll build resistance. So there is quite a bit of new knowledge and technology that needs to be built around using herbicides effectively and sustainably for weed control. And in our previous ACR project, we had a couple of PhD students who did some work to try and show the way with that type of weed control.
Yeah, Richard and Kuhu, I'd like to supplement here again.
Mm.
In intensive cropping systems, Bangladesh, just immediate after harvesting of jute or after harvesting of almond rice, even after harvesting of boru rice, most of the fields remain free from weed. So if a farmer just plant or establish their next crop as early as possible, that may not require to apply the pre-planted herbicide like Roundup. So this way they can also manage, but farmer needs that information, and the operator, the service provider needs this information. So the experienced operator is a quite important issue here. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Uh, we have the next question from Nurul Hassan, Mir Nurul Hassan, and he wants to know whether you have any plans for adoption of VMP in Borishal.
Could I hand that over to Mijan or Haq if he's online still? Because that's, as a project, we're handing over, or we want to hand over to the commercialization process. And so Mijan can tell us a bit about his marketing plan and whether Borishal is one of the areas that he's picked out.
Mr. Vai, can you please open your microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes,
Yes,
we can.
yes,
Thank
Mijan,
you.
we can hear.
Yes, yes. First of all, thanks to Mr. Professor Richard Bell for your nice and detailed presentation of our project of small scale beer for mechanization promotion in Bangladesh. Actually, I am addressed to an attention to the question of Mr. Nurul Hassan Mahmood. That is, have any plan of our project to promote the VMP in southern part of Bangladesh, that is Borishal. Last year, we had a visit in Patuakhali in Borishal region, and we have seen the scenario. And Patuakhali Agriculture University professors and Professor Richard Bell, Professor Namulak, and other teams member also, they have seen, and along with me, there are a lot of opportunity of mung bean planting in southern region. And we have already developed the mung bean seed meter in our latest version of BMP. And it is possible to promote the mung bean planting in Borishal region. But actual question, my focus on the major issues of already Professor Richard Bale and Dr. Enamul have already raised these issues. The trained or a smart operator of planter machines. This is the important issue. And another is I think is knowledge gap of CA, that is conservation agriculture concept, that is used to be the mung bean planting in southern zone. So I think, and we have a lot of experiences in our northern zone. Now the farmers, they are informed and they have already involved the CA practices planting in different region of northern zone, and day by day is increasing. But I have some experience during my last visit in Borishal. The farmers don't have any experience of CA-based planting systems. So first of all, we have to promote the CA knowledge, but also mung bean and others crop planting by our VMP to use the farmers community. This is the important issue, and we have to train more training program to promote the handsome or that is smart operators to handle these machineries. Then we go for the promote of VMP machine or CA planters in our Borishal region. So have you any question, any question in regards to our pilot project of planters used in Bangladesh or others? Uh, that is our team model or PM model or commercialized information. Have any question, anybody?
Mizan, we will take questions one by one. The next question is from Mohammad Rabiul Alam. Can you just mute your uh, speak
Uh,
microphone?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation by Dr. Richard Bell. Sir, I'm actually farming system researcher. I'm working at on-farm research division of BARI. So actually, I'm just hearing your presentation very nicely, and you actually addressed all the things, what is happening in Bangladesh regarding this adoption. So one of the concern is our experience, since we are working in the community level farming systems researcher, we just shared with different categories of farmers, particularly small farmers and marginal farmers. Actually, they are gradually exposed to different vulnerability, particularly climate change. So income, yeah, actually generation of income is their main target of our small farmers. And in fact, some small farmers have some fragmentation of lands, but they shifted their agriculture from because they need their income generation, shifting other business. They are being engaged with some other rather agriculture. In this concern, actually, their main vision when we just buy a machine or at the community level, this CA machine only used for seasonal basis. I just I would like to reflect their opinion. So when I am just buying this machine for only season wheat, but 3 to 4 months he does not utilize this machine. When this machine is it on for seasonal basis. So their opinion is like that. If this machine is utilized with multi-dimensional activities, that will be generate some cash income around the year. So this is one of the main problem, and farmers are not adopting this technology right way. Increasing, but the increasing trend is not sharply in our country perspective. Another issue, actually, if you grow some of the avenue at the community level, and some of the hub of the machinery at the CA platform at the community level, some farmers gathering, and we can also use some DAE, IPM club or ICM club or some other places. So my experience is like this way: if you grow some lead farmers, and we provide some machine with very good demonstration, target oriented demonstration, and big gathering for the community level. They, at least I think this approach will help to adopt some this technology with rapid trend. Another issue is in the recent days some issues is raising in our community level. So we are using heavily fungicide for adopting this technology, CA technology. So at least 3 crops you grow in a sequence, rice, wheat, or mustard, board, yam, or whatever it is, and we applying just fungicide, repeatedly fungicide for each crops to uh, just to suppress weed. In that case, do you have any research findings when we applied just fungicide or in addition to pesticide also is adding to some extent to the soil environment? So what about the actually fate of the adding of this fungicide or pesticide or some other poisonous chemicals to soil? Actually, is it is coming to the is plant eventually uptake and coming to the food chain? Some research findings also indicate some of the cases, maybe the chance it is uptake by the plants and coming to the food chain, which is be detrimental to the human. Just another thing is soil, when adding pesticide or fungicide to the soil, we are applying soil. Yes, weed is suppressing, but eventually, but soil, it sustain in the soil environment. So soil water, and you know, soil water is this colloidal system, soil water, nutrient is there, and some molecules of fungicide is there. So plant is eventually uptake some of the nutrients, some of the molecules of fungicide or some radicals. So what is the fate actually soil environment concerning? And recently different forum is also claimed if we frequently use this Roundup or some other like this pesticide, what will happen in soil environment, and if there are any dangerous to harmful to the human beings also. So I would like to ask some question regarding Richard Bell. You have a wide range of experience, so please would you address some of the things. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Could I take some guidance from Kuhu? How do you want to proceed with this?
I think we would take this as the last question and wrap up.
Right. Okay. Good. Look, I did mention the operators, after they're trained, are looking for job security, and so trying to work out a suitable job business model in order to provide that longer term job security is an issue. But as I said, in the most recent sales, actually half of the people buying them primarily just want to plant their own crop. So for them, the fact that the plant is only used for a few months of the year apparently is not a problem. But for the service providers who are trying to run a business, usually they're running various businesses, not just seeding. They're doing cultivating and transporting and various other businesses. Your point about bringing together large groups of farmers to tell them about the CA and the VMP, well, that's exactly what Hock Corporation does. They have a well-developed model for trying to attract farmer interest and inform them as well. But it's not just about talking, it's also about the on-field demonstrations of what the crop looks like and how it establishes and how good the yield is. And then the final point about herbicides, not fungicides, but herbicides. Look, as I said, herbicides are already almost universally used in Boro rice in Bangladesh now, and in most Amon rice crops. So this issue of the long-term or cumulative effects of herbicides is one for all of agriculture, not just for CA. And there certainly are issues with human health and safety and soil health that need to be addressed. But by and large, herbicides are chemicals that are designed to be active and kill weeds for a short period of time and then to break down. But in some circumstances, the breakdown is slow, and so you can get residual effects. And now that herbicides are part of Bangladesh cropping agriculture, the research community, universities and government institutes need to be actively developing research programs to address these sorts of questions, to make sure that we have good answers for them and that we have sustainable practices.
Okay, now I will just say thank you to the presenters, Richard, Enam, and Mizanul Haq, and for the active participation by our audience. And I would hand over to Robin to make some wrap-up remarks.
Thanks, Kuku. So yes, I'd like to add my thanks to the team presenting. I always find this a really fascinating project because it's spanning that whole range through into commercialisation and scaling. And I'd particularly like to thank Mr. Hock from Hock Corporation for his involvement in the project and for the very interesting perspectives he's brought to the project. Thanks very much to all those who've participated. I can see there's been some additional questions come up, which we will not have time to address now, but I'm sure if you email the project team, so Richard and Enam, I'm sure they'd be very happy. It's great to see what seems to be some participants from Africa joining us for this discussion, because conservation agriculture is a very important issue there. So we'd be very happy to follow up on some of those questions. Please do either to Richard and Anam or to me at ACR.
Sorry, go on.
Thanks very much to everyone. We will have another seminar in this series in a couple of weeks' time. I believe Lynn Crace will be presenting on the work he's been doing on the role of institutions in supporting intensification and the scaling of conservation agriculture. So I think that we'll leave it unless you have some other comments to add, Kuhu.
No, I just had one. I will send all the questions to Richard, Enam, and Ms. Anul, and you can respond to them. And the recording of this webinar will be there on our website.
So the PowerPoint presentation will be available on the ACR SDIP website.
The recording of this webinar will be also available.
Okay, great. So thank you all very much, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you happen to be in the world.